Snow fell like the world had forgotten how to breathe in a small mountain town called Silverpine. A lonely police officer named Caleb Frost thought the night would be just another silent patrol until a trembling German Shepherd puppy appeared from the storm and chose him. Not for food, not for shelter, but for something far more urgent. What the puppy carried in its eyes would send them both deep into the frozen forest and into a race against time to save a life. This story is about love found in the coldest place, about hope, born from grief, and about a tiny hero who refused to give up. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from today. Drop your country in the comments. And if you believe miracles still happen, stay with me for this unforgettable journey. Silverpine, Montana, lay beneath winter like a town that had been gently buried alive. Snow fell without wind, thick and deliberate, each flake descending as if it carried a message the earth was too tired to read. The mountains surrounding the valley loomed like ancient sentinels, their pine-covered slopes fading into a white horizon. Street lamps glowed amber against the storm, their light swallowed by the drifting veil of snowfall. Shops along Main Street had already shuttered for the night, their windows reflecting only the lonely movement of snow and the slow passing of patrol headlights. It was the kind of evening when the world felt paused, suspended between heartbeat and breath. Officer Caleb Frost drove alone through that silence. 42 years old, 6'2", broad-shouldered with the heavy build of a man shaped by years of mountain winters and long shifts, Caleb wore the uniform as if it were part of his skin. His dark hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, his beard trimmed but permanently shadowed his jaw, and his eyes, a faded gray blue, carried the permanent wear of someone who had seen too many endings arrive without warning. The lines around his eyes were not from age alone, but from grief. 3 winters earlier, during a high-speed pursuit in the same mountain pass he now patrolled, he had lost his wife and partner in an accident that turned his world inside out. Since then, the man who once laughed easily had learned to move through life quietly, carefully, as though every sound might break something fragile inside him. The radio crackled once, then fell silent again. No calls, no voices, just static and the rhythmic hiss of snow beneath his tires. Caleb exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the windshield as the heater fought against the cold creeping through the metal frame of the cruiser. He adjusted his gloves, fingers stiff from the chill, and glanced toward the mountains. Even after years of living in Silverpine, winter still made the land feel ancient, untamed, as though the town itself were only a visitor passing through something far older and more powerful. He was about to turn onto Cedar Ridge Road when he saw it. At first, it was only a shape in the snowfall, a dark smudge against the white. Caleb eased his foot off the accelerator. His instincts tightened. As he drew closer, the shape sharpened, small and trembling in the beam of the headlights. A puppy. A German Shepherd puppy stood in the middle of the road, no more than 4 months old, its black and tan coat soaked through with snow, fur clumped and heavy with ice. Its legs were too thin for the storm, its ribs faintly visible beneath the damp fur. Its ears, still too large for its small head, drooped with exhaustion. The puppy did not bark. It did not run. It simply stood there, staring directly at the approaching cruiser. Caleb hit the brakes. The car slid slightly before stopping a few feet from the trembling creature. He sat frozen for a moment, watching the puppy through the falling snow. Most animals bolted at the sight of headlights. This one didn't even flinch. He opened the door. The cold rushed in. "Hey," he said softly. The puppy's body shook, but it took a hesitant step toward him, then another. When it reached his boot, it pressed its small nose against the toe of his shoe. The puppy's eyes, dark brown and impossibly large, glistened with something deeper than fear. There was urgency there, and something else. Recognition, almost. Caleb crouched. "Where'd you come from, little one?" The puppy lifted its head and looked straight at him. No collar, no tags. Just a narrow strip of faded cloth tied loosely around its neck, frayed at the edges, as if it had once been part of something larger. Caleb stood slowly. "You shouldn't be out here." He took a step back toward the cruiser. The puppy followed. Another step. The puppy followed. Caleb reached the door and opened it. The puppy gathered what little strength it had and leapt, landing awkwardly on the passenger seat, panting, snow scattering across the upholstery. Caleb froze. Well, he muttered, a humorless breath escaping him. That's one way to ask for help. The puppy curled slightly, pressing its trembling body against the door, eyes locked on Caleb as if the world beyond the car no longer existed. He closed the door. Inside the cruiser, warmth slowly returned. The puppy's shivering eased but did not stop. Caleb removed his coat and draped it over the small body. The puppy did not resist. It did not move away. It simply stared at him, unblinking, as though memorizing his face. As he drove back toward town, Caleb noticed something that unsettled him more than the storm. The puppy never looked out the window. It watched him. Every turn. Every breath. Every blink. When they reached the Silver Pine police station, the building stood like a solitary lighthouse against the snow, its brick walls glowing beneath the street lamps. Inside, warmth and noise replaced the winter's hush. Two officers sat at the front desk, laughter echoing as one of them, Deputy Mark Henson, a broad, red-bearded man in his early 30s with the easy confidence of someone who had not yet been broken by the job, looked up and whistled. "Well, I'll be damned," Mark said. "Frost, you finally bring home a date?" Caleb stepped inside, the puppy tucked inside his coat. Behind Mark sat Officer Lena Ruiz, late 20s, petite, dark-haired, sharp-eyed, a woman whose humor masked a fierce dedication to her work. She leaned forward. "Is that a puppy?" Caleb nodded. "Found him on Cedar Ridge. No collar." The puppy peeked from beneath the coat, ears lifting weakly. Mark crouched. "Hey there, buddy," the puppy growled, a tiny, protective sound, and pressed closer to Caleb. Lena raised an eyebrow. "Looks like he's already picked his human." Caleb ignored the comment. He set the puppy gently on a desk. The moment he stepped back, the puppy scrambled, slipping on the surface, then jumped straight into his arms again, clinging to his uniform with desperate strength. The room fell quiet. Mark cleared his throat. "That's not normal." Caleb felt a chill unrelated to the weather. The puppy's heart hammered against his chest. It was not acting lost. It was acting relieved. Caleb looked down at the small creature. "You're safe now," he murmured, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. Outside, the snow continued to fall. And somewhere beneath its endless silence, something waited. The storm did not weaken when night finally claimed Silver Pine. Snow kept falling with the slow patience of something that knew it would eventually cover everything. Inside the station, the heater hummed. Boots tracked slush across the floor. Radios murmured in low static. And the world outside felt like another planet entirely. Caleb sat at his desk with the German Shepherd puppy curled against his chest, the borrowed patrol jacket wrapped around its small body. The puppy's shivering had slowed, but it had not stopped. Its tiny heartbeat thudded fast beneath Caleb's palm, and every few seconds it would tilt its head upward and look at him again, as if confirming that he was still there, that the world had not suddenly slipped away. Across the room, Deputy Mark Henson leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his thick chest, studying the scene with open amusement. Mark was the kind of man who seemed built for warmth. Broad, red-bearded, always smiling, his presence alone capable of making a room feel less heavy. "I've seen a lot of strays come through this place," he said. "None of them ever acted like that. That pup's acting like he just walked out of a burning building and you're the only door that didn't collapse." Officer Lena Ruiz set a mug of coffee on Caleb's desk. Lena was smaller than Mark, but carried herself with sharp efficiency, her dark hair tied back, eyes alert, her tone practical even when her expression softened at the sight of the puppy. "We should call the shelter," she said. "See if anyone reported him missing." Caleb nodded but didn't move. The puppy had shifted its paws higher on his chest, its nose brushing his collarbone, its ears flattening whenever someone came too close. When Mark took a step nearer, the puppy let out a tiny growl, more exhausted plea than threat. "Easy," Caleb murmured, stroking the puppy's head. The fur beneath his fingers was coarse with dried snow, tangled and stiff. "No one's taking you anywhere." The puppy relaxed a fraction, but didn't stop watching the room. They checked the local reports. No missing puppy. No calls about a lost German shepherd. The shelter confirmed they had received no notice that matched the description. Outside, the storm worsened. The radio crackled with weather advisories, warnings about closed mountain passes and rising wind. Silver Pine would be sealed inside the snow before morning. Lena folded her arms. He can't stay here all night. Caleb looked down at the puppy. The puppy looked back at him. I'll take him to the shelter in the morning, Caleb said. When the road's clear. Mark raised an eyebrow. You sure that's a good idea? He's already chosen you. Caleb ignored the comment, but his chest tightened anyway. He rose slowly, the puppy clinging tighter as he stood. The station's fluorescent lights hummed overhead. He walked out into the storm again, the cold slicing through the thin places in his coat, the snow immediately reclaiming the world. The puppy tucked its face under his chin, breathing fast, its body small and fragile against the vastness of the night. The drive to his cabin on the edge of town felt longer than usual. The road curved along the mountain slope, the forest rising dark and silent on one side, the valley disappearing into white on the other. Caleb drove carefully, one hand on the wheel, the other steadying the puppy on the seat beside him. Every few moments, the puppy would lift its head and look at him again. Still there. Still here. Caleb's cabin sat alone near the tree line, a modest structure of dark wood and stone, half buried by the storm. When he stepped inside, the familiar quiet greeted him. No voices, no music. Just the wind against the walls and the steady ticking of the old clock in the kitchen. He set the puppy on the floor near the fireplace, removed his coat, and knelt. The puppy's legs trembled when it stood, but it didn't move away. Instead, it walked forward and pressed its forehead against Caleb's knee. You're stubborn, Caleb said softly. He filled a bowl with water and set it down. The puppy sniffed it, then turned away and pressed closer to him. He opened a can of soup, poured some of the broth into another bowl, cooled it, and tried again. The puppy drank only a few small laps before returning to him, curling up near his boots. Caleb built a fire. The room warmed slowly. Snow hissed and melted on the hearthstones. The puppy's eyes fluttered, exhaustion pulling at it, but every time Caleb shifted, the puppy stirred and looked up again, as if sleep itself were dangerous. He remembered the last winter before his wife died. How she used to sit on this same floor, laughing as she tried to teach their old K9 partner to fetch a boot that he had absolutely no interest in retrieving. How the room had once held music, warmth, voices. The puppy's head rested on his foot. Don't, Caleb whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the memory or the animal. Hours passed. The storm outside howled. The puppy finally slept, but even in sleep its paws twitched, its body tense, breath uneven. Caleb covered it with a blanket and sat on the couch, watching the fire, the shadows moving across the walls. For the first time in years, the silence in the cabin did not feel empty. It felt occupied. Sometime near dawn, the puppy woke with a sharp whine. It scrambled to its feet and ran to the door, scratching at the wood, barking urgently. Caleb jolted upright. What is it? He asked, heart suddenly pounding. The puppy turned in a tight circle, barked again, then ran back to him, grabbing the hem of his pant leg with its small teeth and pulling, hard. Caleb froze. No, he said quietly. Not yet. It's still dark. The storm? The puppy barked again, louder, then ran back to the door and scratched furiously. Snow drifting in through the cracks. Caleb's instincts, honed by years on the job, flared awake. This wasn't fear. This wasn't hunger. This was urgency. He pulled on his boots and coat, clipped on his radio, and opened the door. Wind and snow rushed in. The puppy shot past him into the storm, stopping only a few feet away to look back, ears pinned, eyes burning with insistence. Caleb stepped into the snow. The world outside was still wrapped in night, the sky a deep blue gray, the forest looming like a wall of shadow. The puppy ran a few steps, stopped, turned again, waiting. All right, Caleb murmured. I'm coming. And for the first time since the storm had begun, the silence of winter did not feel empty. It felt like a warning. The world outside Caleb's cabin had transformed into something both ancient and unrecognizable. Snow fell in heavy curtains, swallowing sound, swallowing distance, swallowing even the stars. The narrow beam of his flashlight cut a trembling path across the ground as he followed the small dark figure ahead of him. The German shepherd puppy, still unnamed, still wrapped in the borrowed weight of Caleb's coat hours earlier, moved through the drifts with a strange, uneven determination. Its legs were short, its body too light for this storm, yet it did not hesitate. Every few steps, it stopped and turned its head to check if Caleb remained behind it. Only when he nodded did it continue. Caleb's boots sank into the powder. The cold bit at his cheeks, sharp and unforgiving. He glanced at his watch. Nearly 5 in the morning. The storm had not eased. Somewhere far below the mountain, the town of Silverpine still slept, unaware that something fragile and urgent was unfolding just beyond its frozen edge. The puppy reached the tree line and slowed, its nose dropping to the snow. Its movements changed. Where before it had simply run, now it crept. It sniffed in tight circles, tail stiff, ears flicking toward every sound the forest dared to make. Caleb crouched beside it, lowering his flashlight. "What are you looking for?" he whispered. The puppy did not answer, but it moved again, veering left, then right, then stopping sharply at the base of a half-buried log. It pawed at the snow with frantic energy. The snow sprayed away beneath its small claws, revealing something dark beneath. Caleb knelt. His gloves brushed against fabric. A glove. Small. Child-sized. Faded blue, soaked stiff with ice, the fingertips torn. Caleb lifted it slowly. His breath fogged harder. The puppy whined and pawed at the glove, then darted forward again. Caleb's pulse accelerated. This was no lost pet wandering in a storm. This was tracking. Instinctively, he reached for his radio. The signal sputtered, then cleared. "Dispatch, this is Officer Frost. I'm on Cedar Ridge near the eastern tree line. I may have located personal items belonging to a child, requesting backup and search units." Static crackled before the voice returned. "Copy, Officer Frost. Weather's delaying response. Nearest unit is 40 minutes out." Caleb swallowed. 40 minutes could be a lifetime. The puppy barked sharply and sprinted ahead. They moved deeper into the forest, where the wind howled louder and the snow fell thicker. The trees closed around them, towering black silhouettes against the storm. The puppy stopped again, pawing at the ground, then ran to Caleb, nudged his knee, and turned back toward a nearby snowbank. Caleb approached, sweeping the flashlight low. There, half buried, lay a narrow strip of cloth. He recognized it instantly, a piece of a child's scarf, red and white, frayed at the ends, smeared dark with dried blood. Caleb's chest tightened. "God," he whispered. The puppy pressed its small body against his leg, trembling. Its breath came in sharp little puffs, but its eyes were fierce with resolve. It nudged the cloth again, then turned and trotted onward. They followed a faint trail of disturbances, drag marks in the snow, broken twigs, scuffed earth. The puppy navigated it with growing confidence, as though the forest itself were speaking a language only it could hear. Caleb's flashlight revealed more signs. A dropped mitten, a snapped zipper tab, a small smear of blood frozen on a rock. Time felt distorted. Minutes stretched. The storm thickened. Caleb's gloves stiffened with ice. Then the puppy stopped abruptly. It lowered its body, almost flattening itself against the ground, and let out a low, broken whine. Caleb's heart hammered. He followed its gaze. Beneath a cluster of fallen branches at the base of an old pine lay a small shape. A child. Caleb rushed forward, dropping to his knees. The boy, no older than 7, was curled tightly, his coat torn, face pale and streaked with dried tears and dirt. His lips were blue. His breathing was shallow, uneven. One leg lay at an unnatural angle, swollen beneath the torn fabric. The puppy bolted to the child's side and pressed itself against his chest, whining softly, licking his cheek again and again. Caleb's hands trembled as he reached out. "Hey. Hey, kid," Can you hear me? The boy's eyelids fluttered. His lips parted. Atlas, he whispered. Caleb blinked. Atlas? The puppy let out a soft cry at the sound of its name and pressed closer to the boy. Caleb exhaled shakily and grabbed his radio. Dispatch. I have located the child. Approximately 7 years old, conscious but severely injured, requesting immediate EMS. Copy. Units en route. Stay with him. Caleb removed his jacket and draped it over the boy's small body, shielding him from the wind. He checked his pulse, weak but present. He brushed the snow from the boy's hair. What's your name? Caleb asked. The boy swallowed. Rowan. Rowan. I'm Officer Caleb. Help is coming. You're safe now. Rowan's eyes flickered toward the puppy. I told him to go find help. Caleb's throat closed. The puppy had not been lost. It had been sent. Rowan's fingers twitched toward the dog. The puppy licked them, tail wagging weakly, then lay across his chest as though anchoring him to the earth. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, barely audible through the storm. Caleb pressed his gloved hand over Rowan's smaller one. You did good, he whispered. Both of you. Snow continued to fall, but the forest no longer felt empty. Hope had found them. The forest had never felt so alive and so cruel at the same time. Wind whipped the treetops, scattering fresh snow across the narrow clearing where Caleb knelt beside Rowan. The boy's breathing was shallow, his small chest rising unevenly beneath the heavy weight of the jacket Caleb had wrapped around him. Atlas remained pressed against Rowan's side, the tiny German shepherd's body rigid with focus, as if the forest itself would steal the child away the moment it loosened its grip. Caleb forced himself to stay calm. He had worked countless emergencies in his career, but this one carved into him differently. The child's face, pale beneath layers of dirt and dried blood, reminded him too much of the past, of his wife's face the night the medics shook their heads. He pushed the memory down. This moment demanded everything he had. Rowan, he said quietly, brushing the boy's hair from his eyes. Stay with me. Can you tell me what happened? Rowan swallowed. His voice came out thin and broken. We were camping, Mom and me, and Atlas. He coughed weakly. A man came. He said he'd help. Then he got mad. I ran. I fell. Atlas whimpered at the memory, pressing closer to the boy's chest. Caleb's jaw tightened. Someone else had been here. Someone dangerous. But that could wait. Survival came first. He checked Rowan's injured leg again. The swelling was severe, the angle wrong. A fracture, maybe worse. The boy's fingers were numb with cold. His lips trembled. Don't try to move, Caleb told him. You're doing great. Help is coming. Rowan nodded faintly, though his eyes were heavy with exhaustion. Atlas licked his cheek again, then looked up at Caleb with an expression so intense it made his chest ache. Minutes passed like hours. Snow piled on Caleb's shoulders. He shielded Rowan from the wind with his own body, crouched low, boots buried in ice. The radio crackled. Officer Frost, EMS is 5 minutes out. Can you maintain the child's condition? I'm with him, Caleb replied. He's conscious. Hypothermia risk. Leg fracture. Understood. Stay put. Caleb glanced around. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Atlas growled softly at the shadows. Rowan's eyelids fluttered. Am I gonna die? Caleb shook his head. Not tonight. The boy exhaled shakily. Atlas was scared. He didn't want to leave me. Atlas's tail twitched at the sound of his name. You were brave, Caleb said. Both of you. The wind shifted. Distant lights flickered between the trees. They're here, Caleb whispered. Soon the stillness shattered. Paramedics pushed through the underbrush, faces pale beneath headlamps, breath steaming. 2 officers followed, boots crunching through the snow. We got him, Caleb said. The medics knelt immediately, checking Rowan's vitals, cutting away frozen fabric, stabilizing the injured leg. He's dehydrated, considerable trauma. But he's alive, one of them said. Rowan whimpered as they lifted him gently onto the stretcher. Atlas barked sharply, scrambling forward. "Hey," Caleb said softly, scooping the puppy into his arms. "He's not going without you." Rowan's eyes opened weakly. "Atlas." Caleb brought the puppy closer so Rowan could see him. Atlas wriggled, licking Rowan's cheek, tail wagging furiously. The boy's lips curved in a small, exhausted smile. "I told him to find help," Rowan whispered. "He listened." Caleb swallowed hard. The rescue team moved quickly through the forest, following the trail back toward the waiting ambulance. Snow fell heavier, the storm thickening around them. Inside the ambulance, warmth returned. Rowan shivered beneath blankets, IV line already in his arm. Atlas sat on Caleb's lap, trembling, refusing to look away from the stretcher. The sirens wailed into the night. At Silverpine Medical Center, bright lights replaced the darkness of the forest. Nurses rushed Rowan through the doors. Caleb stood in the waiting area, uniform soaked, hands still shaking. Atlas remained curled against his chest. Minutes stretched. Then hours. Finally, a doctor approached. Tall, tired, eyes kind. "He's stable," the doctor said. "Fractured leg, hypothermia, dehydration, but he'll recover." Caleb closed his eyes. Rowan's mother arrived soon after, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she thanked everyone in sight. When she saw Atlas, her breath caught. "He wouldn't stop barking when Rowan disappeared," she said. "We thought we lost both of them." Caleb looked down at the puppy. He never gave up. They were allowed into Rowan's room briefly. The boy lay small and pale under white blankets, leg in a cast. When he saw Atlas, his face brightened. "You came back," he whispered. Atlas climbed carefully onto the bed and curled against him. Caleb stood in the corner, something inside him shifting. For the first time in years, the weight he carried loosened. The storm outside finally began to fade. Morning arrived quietly over Silverpine, as if the night itself were afraid to disturb what had survived the storm. The sky remained a pale, clouded gray, but the snow had finally slowed, settling into a hush that wrapped the town in something almost like peace. Inside Silverpine Medical Center, that quiet did not exist. Machines hummed. Shoes squeaked across tile. Voices whispered in hallways, thick with exhaustion and relief. Caleb Frost sat in a plastic chair outside room 214, his uniform still damp, hair matted from snow and sweat. Atlas lay curled on his lap, a small black and tan knot of warmth, eyes half open but never fully resting. Every time a nurse passed, the puppy's head lifted. Every time a door opened, its ears twitched. "You're not missing anything," Caleb murmured, stroking the coarse fur along Atlas's spine. "He's safe." "You did your job." Atlas's tail thumped once, weakly. Hours earlier, after the medics had rushed Rowan into surgery, Caleb had followed in a haze, hands numb, heart unsteady. He hadn't removed his boots. He hadn't sat. He hadn't spoken. When the doctor finally emerged and told him the boy would live, something inside him had collapsed and rebuilt all at once. Now, he waited. Nurse Evelyn Harper approached with 2 paper cups of coffee. Evelyn was in her early 50s, tall and silver-haired, her posture calm in the way only years of tending broken people could teach. She handed 1 cup to Caleb. "You look like you've been awake for a week." "Feels like it," he said. She nodded at Atlas. "That's the hero?" Caleb glanced down. "He is." Evelyn smiled softly. "Rowan's been asking for him." Caleb's breath caught. "Can we see him?" She nodded. "Just for a moment." Inside the room, Rowan lay pale but peaceful, his leg wrapped in thick white cast, IV line taped to his arm. His breathing was slow, steady. His mother, Maggie Cole, sat at his side, her hair tangled from tears and sleeplessness, her eyes rimmed red but bright with gratitude. Maggie was in her early 30s, slight in frame, her face marked by years of quiet struggle and fierce devotion to her son. When she saw Caleb, she rose immediately. "You stayed," she said. Caleb nodded. "He wasn't alone." Maggie's gaze fell on Atlas, Her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, you're here." Rowan stirred. His eyes fluttered open. "Atlas," he whispered. Caleb gently placed the puppy on the bed. Atlas crawled onto Rowan's chest, curling carefully as if aware of every fragile place. Rowan's small hand trembled as it closed around the puppy's fur. "You listened," Rowan murmured. Atlas licked his cheek. Maggie covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "He saved him," she whispered. Caleb felt something tear open inside his chest. They spoke quietly. Rowan told the story in fragments. The man who had approached their campsite. The argument, the running, the fall. How Atlas had refused to leave his side until Rowan, shivering and scared, had begged him to find help. "I knew he'd come back," Rowan said. Caleb closed his eyes. After visiting hours ended, Maggie walked Caleb into the hallway. "I don't know how to thank you." Caleb shook his head. "Thank him." Maggie hesitated. "Atlas, he's been through so much. He hasn't been eating. He cries whenever he's away from you. The shelter says he needs stability." I don't know what to do." Caleb looked down at the puppy who leaned against his leg. "I can keep him," he said before he had time to think. Maggie's eyes widened. "Would you?" Caleb nodded. That night, Atlas slept on Caleb's chest in the hospital chair, rising and falling with his breathing. For the first time in years, Caleb dreamed. Days passed. Rowan improved. The storm cleared. Sunlight returned to Silverpine. One afternoon, Rowan looked at Caleb seriously. "When I go home, can Atlas stay with you for a while? He won't be scared with you." Caleb knelt beside the bed. "If that's what you want." Rowan smiled. Weeks later, Rowan was discharged. Maggie hugged Caleb fiercely. "You saved my son," she said. Caleb looked down at Atlas. "No, he did." Maggie nodded. "Then maybe he saved you too." Caleb did not answer. He didn't need to. Outside, the snow began to melt. Spring did not arrive in Silverpine the way it did in storybooks. There were no sudden blooms, no birds announcing its arrival in song. Instead, spring came slowly, almost shyly, as though it were afraid of waking the mountain after such a long winter. The snow began to loosen its grip on the ground. Thin rivers of meltwater traced the streets, and the frozen silence that had dominated the town for months finally began to soften. Caleb Frost noticed the change from the porch of his cabin, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, Atlas curled at his feet. The puppy had grown. Not much, but enough for Caleb to see it. A little more weight on his frame, a little more steadiness in his steps, a little more life in his eyes. The fear that once lived there had not vanished, but it no longer ruled him. Atlas lifted his head when the wind moved through the trees, ears twitching, alert, then relaxed again when nothing followed. Caleb smiled faintly. The cabin no longer felt empty. Since the night at the hospital, Atlas had refused to leave him. The shelter had officially placed the puppy under Caleb's temporary care, while the investigation around Rowan's disappearance continued. Maggie visited often. Rowan called whenever he could. Atlas listened to the boy's voice through the phone with his head tilted, tail wagging, as if he could somehow understand every word. Life, once frozen, had begun to move again. That morning, Caleb was scheduled to return to full duty. He clipped Atlas's new blue collar around his neck, small but growing, the metal tag engraved simply with his name, and knelt to meet his eyes. "I'll be back," Caleb said. Atlas whimpered softly, nose pressing against Caleb's chest. "I always come back," Caleb promised. At the station, Mark and Lena noticed immediately. "Well, I'll be damned," Mark said. "You look lighter." Caleb shrugged. "Maybe winter's letting go." Lena crouched to scratch Atlas's ears. "He's putting on weight. You're doing something right." Caleb didn't answer, but he felt the truth of it settle in his bones. That afternoon, Maggie called. Rowan wanted to see Atlas. Caleb drove them to the park on the edge of town, where the snow had melted into patchwork fields of brown grass and silver puddles. Rowan sat on a bench wrapped in his coat, his cast now replaced by a brace, his face brighter, stronger. When Atlas spotted him, the puppy surged forward, nearly pulling the leash from Caleb's hand. "Atlas!" Rowan laughed. Atlas leapt into the boy's arms, licking his face, tail a blur. Maggie wiped her eyes. "He's been counting the days." Rowan looked up at Caleb, serious. "He doesn't cry at night anymore." Caleb nodded. "Neither do I." They spent the afternoon together. Laughter filled the cold air. For a moment, everything felt right. When the sun dipped behind the mountain, Maggie turned to Caleb. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about Atlas." Caleb felt his chest tighten. "He chose you," she continued. "Before any of this happened, he always watched your badge when you came to the hospital. I think he knew." Caleb swallowed. Rowan reached for Caleb's hand. "Can Atlas stay with you, for good?" The wind stilled. Caleb looked at Atlas. Atlas looked back. "Yes," Caleb said. Rowan smiled. That night, back at the cabin, Atlas explored every corner as if seeing it for the first time. He stopped at the old photograph on the shelf, Caleb and his wife, smiling beneath a summer sky, and stared. Caleb crouched beside him. "That's who I lost," he whispered. Atlas pressed his forehead to Caleb's knee. For the first time in years, Caleb allowed himself to grieve. Not in silence, not alone. Weeks passed. The snow vanished from the valley. Flowers emerged between stones. The town of Silverpine began to breathe again. So did Caleb. One evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold, Caleb sat on the porch with Atlas at his side. The puppy leaned against him, solid and warm. Caleb felt something he had not felt in a long time. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of life. The door of the cabin opened behind him. Maggie and Rowan stood there, smiling. Rowan held a small wooden sign he had carved himself. It read, "Thank you for bringing us back to each other." Caleb's eyes burned. Atlas barked softly, tail wagging. And as the light faded across the mountains of Montana, Caleb realized that winter had finally released him. Not because the snow was gone, but because love had returned. This story reminds us that God's miracles do not always arrive with thunder or fire. Sometimes they arrive quietly, on 4 small paws, through the courage of a frightened puppy, and the broken heart of a man who had forgotten how to hope. When life feels cold and the road feels too long, God often sends help in forms we never expect. A stranger, a friend, a small voice, a simple act of love. If you are walking through your own winter today, remember this: you are not alone. And the same God who guided that puppy through the snow is guiding your life even now. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us where you are watching from. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue spreading light together. May God bless you and your family. May peace walk beside you, and may your darkest nights always lead to brighter mornings. If you believe in miracles, type Amen in the comments.